Hi guys, so welcome to the channel and welcome to the old kitchen. I've just pulled up a chair. It's about 9 o'clock in the morning here, and as promised I'm going to do a bit of a longer video for those of you who are a bit more interested in finding out a bit more about the dig. So I'll show you around, kind of talk you through the dig and what I've uncovered so far. Hopefully you can try and answer some of the main questions, the biggest questions that keep on coming up in the comment section. And also a little bit later I will show you the objects I've found, what I've pulled out of the spoil. And that was one of the main questions or concerns that keeps on coming up. People asking, have you just been chucking? I think a lot of people thought I was just chucking everything away. Have I been sifting? Have I been using a metal detector? And I have been for the whole dig. Not everything I do I show on camera. A lot of what I do doesn't make it to camera. You only see the highlight section. So the last video I think was 5 minutes of time lapse, which is all on 64 times speed, so that equates to about 5 or 6 hours, maybe 6 hours work, but realistically it's more like 25 hours work. So most of what I do, kind of sifting and so on, it doesn't make it to the videos. So I will show you what I found through the sifting and so on. And I also have been keeping the stones. You can see there behind me in a pile. Other people have asked, have I kept the good stone, the walling stone that's obviously fallen off the walls and is in the spoil. I have been keeping that and putting that to one side, so I will reuse that when patching up little bits of the walls. So the biggest question I suppose, or series of questions that keeps on coming up is how did I know it was here, or did I have any idea it was here, and how did I know? Had I ever done any digging before? And I did have some idea that it was here, but I never knew the extent and scale of it, and kind of any details about it and the layout and so on. So some people speculated that there was the map that led me to, kind of prompted me to dig or directed me to where to dig, because I mentioned in the video description there is a map that I found, or it was sent to me. I mean, I didn't find it, in fact. It was sent to me as a link. It's on a National Archive, available online maps, I think, of the whole country, the whole of Wales, the Welsh National Archive. But that was, in fact, was only sent to me by my dad after I'd already started digging, so it isn't what led me to start digging. I think I'd already uncovered the whole of the external side of this wall when I received it. And from now I have it, it is a kind of useful resource in terms of looking at the shape. I think it gives a good, I don't know how accurate it is, but I think it gives an indication of the shape and maybe the extent of the building going in that direction behind the camera. And I will show you the map a little later. But again, that's not what prompted me to dig or directed me kind of to a spot to dig. The reason why I had an idea it was here is because really just mostly who passed down local knowledge. I was always told by my mum and dad that there was an old kind of ruins of an old building up here. I don't really know the ultimate source of that knowledge and who told them or how they knew really, but that's what I've always been told. So for context, this bit of land here, which the dig site is on, as it were, is an extended kind of part of the garden of my family home, the home that I grew up in, which you can just about see behind me, in fact, which is just down the hill on the other side of the road. And it has kind of a main garden right next to the house down there, but then this bit extends up the hillside. It's about half an acre, and it's mostly laid to grass. The bit that I've been digging out, as you will have seen, and clearing is very overgrown and has always been very overgrown as far as I can remember. But behind the camera, there is a grassy mound, which is kind of obviously artificial and kind of has been piled up, and someone's tried to grow grass over it. And I always assumed, even though I was told there was no building up here, kind of ruins at least, that was it. Literally was just a pile of stones, pile of rubble that was in one corner, and someone had tried to grow grass over it. I never had any idea that it kind of extended this far, or there was anything of the walls or the floor remaining. I thought it was just a pile of stones. So there's a grassy mound behind you. I'll show you. You can kind of see in kind of the lawned area of this site. But the reason why I started digging here and not back there is because I had previously done a little bit of digging in this spot before, but for a completely different reason. So it seems crazy now I know what's here, but I used to, in fact, park up an old motorbike that I had just here, kind of when the soil was still here, at this level, right in front of the fireplace. I built a kind of a wooden platform. It was about 2 meters by 1 meter to accommodate the bike. I think it was just a couple of sleepers and then boards across it. And I have a picture of that, which I'll put in this video for you to look at. So that picture is taken right here. So it's taken from that way, pointing down this direction. But that bike was right there. So I built this platform, and I sort of dug down in a few spots to level it out because I wanted it to be flat for the bike, for it to be stable. And I used to drive the bike round and up onto that platform over what I now know is obviously a whole wall, but back then was just a mound of earth. So it was kind of naturally ramped against the other side of this wall. So I dug down in a few spots, and I also I think kind of shaped the ramp a bit more to make it easier to drive up onto. And in digging down a little bit to level it out, I found the very, very top of this bit of metal here, the fireplace. What I now know is a whole fireplace. And I think in the first part of the time lapse, in the point about halfway through, when I spin round to the inside of the building, when I start digging here, you can see there's a couple, just 2 or 3 inches of this bit of metal sticking out. So I had already seen that when I was sort of digging a little bit in here to make this bike platform. And I think at the time I tried to pull this out because it was getting in the way. In fact, because I couldn't, I assumed it must be stuck in stone of some kind, fixed into stone. But because I needed it for another reason at that time, I didn't really do much more digging, and I assumed there must be a little bit of a wall here, but I never knew there was the full breadth of the wall and also the floor. So I think I did dig down a little bit, but because I couldn't find anything, I just assumed that there was just a dirt floor and maybe a little bit of stone around the metal, keeping it fixed in, but that was it. It just never occurred to me to dig so far down, and another foot or so down, there would be flagstones. I never knew they were here, and had I known, I would have dug this up, a decade ago easily. If I knew the full extent of what was here. So the house, say this is my family home, the garden, my family home. It's been in my family since the mid 1980s. I was born in '89. And I used to play up on this site as a kid, pretty much just here, right over there. And not only that, I used to dig, in fact. I remember kind of building dens and things with my brother and my cousins and friends and so on, and being up on this site a lot, and I have no memory at all of ever seeing any part of a wall, anything that was above ground. It's always been kind of hidden, to me at least. I was told that, I think within living memory, there have been parts of this house that were visible above ground. Maybe sort of 35, 40 years ago. I think maybe a single part of a single wall was a little bit higher, maybe head height, which has since collapsed. I think maybe bits of it were taken. So I think again that's kind of I suppose the source of the local knowledge that there was a building here. It's just there were previously, maybe a few decades ago, a bit more of it visible above ground. Very little of it, but a little bit you could see. And in terms of how it gets buried, how it got buried, and why it's been covered, which is another main question that comes up a lot. And I have touched on this in the comments. I have made a few comments of replies to people that there definitely must have been a conscious effort to remove parts of the building, quite a lot of it, particularly the roof, but also parts of the walls. I think the walls have been taken for stone, to make other buildings or for other garden walls, because there's just not enough of it here. Even if it was a whole, even just a single story dwelling, the whole walls and the roof, and had been abandoned and then left to collapse, there'll be a lot more building material in the spoil. So I have, as I said, pulled out parts of walling stone from the spoil, but this is nowhere near enough. If these walls were all full height, it would take a lot more stone than that to build them back up again. So yeah, a lot of it must have been taken. I think the whole roof was taken. So I found no timbers, no tiles, no evidence of a roof or other kind of bits of wood. I think it must have all been taken away and repurposed, I suspect, for another use. I suppose it's possible that they were sort of raised to the ground, and it is under, for example, the grassy mound behind the camera, and the rest of the building materials are there. But I don't think that's likely. I think it was probably taken for other buildings. So I suspect this was owned by a local farm. Historically, there's a big farmhouse just over the other side of the road, which in fact features on the same map from 1839. And they own obviously a lot of farmland around here, but they also own other houses, other cottages around here. So I think these would have been a worker's cottage. That was, maybe they just needed the materials for another barn or another building, and they took it away. And then as for the rest of it, I just think it's been naturally covered over time. A few people in the comments said things like plague house, and this is like the start of a horror movie. But I don't think it was buried for any sinister reason. I just think it was covered up through a combination of kind of the little bit of the building material, the wall collapsing in, the mortar and so on, and then just accumulation over decades, 100 years of vegetation. Because this thing acts like a giant trough, basically. It accumulates all the leaves and the soil, I guess, blown in here. A few people mentioned things like a landslide as a theory, but this which is understandable because you didn't know where this is situated, but it's really at kind of at the very top, or near the very top of a hill. There isn't really any land above this which could have slipped down. So I think that's not really a realistic theory. Yeah, so I just think I don't know if it was necessarily purposefully buried. It was definitely purposefully, must have been purposefully, deliberately kind of knocked down, taken apart. But I think the rest of it just got covered naturally over time, and has been covered for a very long, decades, certainly many decades. In terms of when it was abandoned or stopped being lived in, I assume maybe abandoned. I don't know. I would think maybe 100 years ago or so. I don't know that. It's really kind of a guess, roughly. If I find more historical records that shed light on that, I will share them with you. But that would be my best guess, maybe 100+ years ago. Yeah, and the age of the house. I said 200 years in the description, but yeah, as a few people have said, it could be much older than that. I certainly think bits of it are a bit more modern. Some of the internal fixtures and fittings. I think the fireplace, for example, is probably less than 200 years old. But there's certainly the walls and the general. The walls of the building could potentially be 300-400 years old. I really don't know. But yeah, hopefully that should answer some of the bigger questions that keep on coming up. So yeah, let me show you around, and I'll give you a bit more detail about the dig. So this is where I started, just behind the fireplace on the outside wall, and the wall here is about 2 or 3 feet high, maybe up to 1 meter high. Although of course most of it has collapsed, what is remaining at the bottom is actually in parts in reasonable condition. I mean, the mortar isn't completely crumbling away. Bits and pieces, there are parts where roots have obviously damaged it, but for the most part it's not so bad. And I had to dig this wide trench, which you might have seen in part 1, next to the wall, because when you're digging right next to it, all the soil keeps on falling back in. And also I wanted to be sure there was no more going in this direction. Not least because I was going to pile all this stone here, which you can see. These are the bits of the walling stone, some of which are quite large, and many of them have got pieces of mortar still stuck on there. And this bottom corner towards the roadside is quite badly collapsed, so I will use that stone to patch up bits and pieces of this, particularly this bit here. And you can see there are already kind of loads of weeds starting to grow back out the top of this. And in this corner I came to a bit of an abrupt halt, really. Progress stalled because there is this giant stump here. I think it's willow coppice, mostly willow. I think there's a bit of hazel too. And you might have, the keen observers amongst you might have seen in the second part of the time lapse I did, so cut that with a chainsaw, and then there was about 2 seconds of me trying to dig through here. So I kind of had naive ambitions of being able to cut through there, follow this line of the external wall up through there and meet that on the other side. By cutting a bit away, I'd be able to get in there with a kind of a pick a little bit, but that I quickly abandoned that, to be honest, and went elsewhere because it was just impossible to make any progress. It's still so thick with roots, and I could cut more of this stump away, but there's no purpose because the root ball will still be there, and it's very difficult to dig in there. So that's kind of paused for the time being. On the other side, well, the very far side, is a similar story again, as you might have seen from the video. So I still don't know what this curved part is. Some people speculate it might have been an oven of some kind, and I thought maybe on the inside of this, the other side, which I've now revealed on the internal, which I'll show you, I thought there would be a gap, a kind of hollow of some kind leading into this, but there isn't. It's just a flat wall. So I'm still not sure what this is. If you have any ideas, please let me know in the comments. And there is a stump on top, that's a hazel, which I will dig out at some point. And yeah, when I was digging this, these again from part 1 of the time lapse, there were roots wrapped all the way along this, round that curve, and here in this corner there's just a whole root ball, because there is a giant ash tree just there, which has grown up since the house stopped being lived in. I think definitely. I mean, it is a big tree, but ash trees go big, much bigger than that, much wider at the base, and yeah, maybe it's 100 or so years old, a bit more maybe. But I think I now know, because I've seen the inside of the wall. That's the inside edge of this wall going, the lengthways wall. I now know this is the very end, so that stone there is probably I think is the very end stone. That's the corner, effectively just under that root. But I can't go any further here because of just how many roots there are, and also there's an old woodshed there. So this is the map. I've gone analog and just printed it off. So this actually comes from a tithe map. So tithes are a form of taxation that's levied by the church, or payable to the church. The tithe maps were made to obviously to map out the properties within a given church parish, the owners, the landowners, the size of the properties. I suppose to figure out who was liable for tax and the amount of tax. So this, as I said, comes from, in my description, comes from 1839, which I think was the peak year for doing tithe maps. And it was just on a public National Archive. I think there's a link to it. There's a much bigger map, which obviously had more details and kind of the date and everything, and the details of the surveyor. But I've just printed out a little part of it. So this is the house we're digging, and what the wall just there. So the first part of the wall I revealed is the downhill side external wall there. So it's the narrow edge. So it's a long narrow building. It stretches from there to there, roughly in line with this farmhouse, the old farmhouse on the other side of the road, which is still there. And this is the house. That's my family home. This is part of the garden of. So the building. So I mean, I don't know how accurate this is in terms of ratio, in terms of the scale. You know, the ratio kind of the width to the length of the building. I certainly think the shape will be accurate. But I would think probably at a minimum that this building is two and a half to 3 times as long as it is wide, i.e. that the perpendicular walls running that way, left and right, are 2.5 to 3 times as long as this wall is wide. So I now know the full width of the building because I've obviously found both sides of the wall. But I think at a minimum it will extend to the far end of those bushes, and I will show you the other side and show you where it lines up with here in terms of the far end of this. As I said, the far end of the building sort of lines up with the end of this old farmhouse. So let me show you the steps quickly. So I think I've put in the comments that these steps were never hidden, never buried. I just thought they were regular garden steps. They never used to get used that much because they're quite steep and slippery. I think I've slipped down these quite a number of times. And they're just better access points to this site, really. They get used more often. And I have previously cleaned these up before. Another time I did sweep them down and clear this space. And there used to be a gate here when I was a kid. You can see there are 2 what were points for hinges. There used to be a little garden gate. It was a little picket gate, kind of half size, kind of waist height picket gate. That was made out of oak, I think, but eventually it just rotted away, kind of fell to pieces. It was always in quite poor condition. I don't think it hasn't been in this space for at least probably 15-20 years, I think. And I have previously thought about building a new gate, which I may still do. It'd be nice to get a new gate in there, but I would get a full height kind of boarded gate rather than a picket gate. And also parts of these walls need patching up. This right hand side in poor conditions. That's another thing for the to-do list. But yeah, I think these steps may well have been the main access point to the house. So my suspicion is that they lead up directly to a doorway. So if I'm right, that will be in the part 3 of the dig. But I think potentially, but I'll show you on the inside, there will be a doorway just kind of there leading into the house. So this is the mound I was talking about. It's not that obvious from this angle, but this whole bit area is mounded up. And the grass has often been quite sort of patchy and worse quality than bits and pieces of it. And you can see there are a couple of stones poking through. And the far end of the farmhouse I showed you on the map is probably about here. So it's possible there are bits of the building that extend through this bit of grass here. So as I said, that's where I always thought were the old ruins were, just underneath this bit of grass right here. But I think at a minimum, as I said, that it will stretch back to the very end of the bushes here. So I'll have to dig out all of this space, all through here. There's a long way to go. And I have now dug out what has become quite a big hole, which has kind of complicated things. It's actually quite difficult to get out of this hole, in actual fact, because I was climbing up this side. This is the latest bit I revealed, that side of the wall. But now it's quite difficult to get out without the lowest points of the fireplace and this wall here. But I don't want to damage them, you know, so it's become tricky to get out. That's partly why I'm hoping to find a doorway. So this is the latest bit I revealed, this side of the wall, the other side. And parts of these internal walls, as you will have seen, are covered in this kind of, I think it's a lime plaster of some kind, a lime render. Lime was commonly used in old buildings around here, although obviously a lot of it has crumbled away. And I guess that would have, when the walls were full height, that would have extended all the way up to the ceiling, I suppose, and there wouldn't have been any visible stonework on the inside of the building, potentially, or at least not much of it. And this bit will stick with roots again from the tree. That's the big ash tree there, just there, and there are other stumps here too. Although fortunately, the roots, as you will have seen, they come over the top of the wall, not through it. And I suppose roots always follow the path of least resistance, but I still kind of had concerns that there might just be roots, certainly from the big tree, that had just kind of busted through this wall or severely damaged it. And again, obviously, it has largely fallen down. But what is remaining is in no worse condition than the rest of the walls that are here. And this is the inside. This is the other side of that curved bit. So the curved bit is just there. As I said, when I found this bit, I thought there might be some kind of entrance here, some kind of a hole that led into that bit, but there is nothing. There's just a flat wall. But there is a part of brickwork there, which I think must have been used to patch up bits, because it's hardly any brickwork. It's obviously mostly stone. And the floor is in pretty good condition. There are bits and cracks and bits and pieces, but that's quite common even in buildings that are still lived in. And there's some massive flagstones here. I think someone said in the comments they would have cost a pretty penny. I think that's right. Even now, this kind of thing is very expensive to buy. And this is the other side of the wall. So again, similar story, bits and pieces of the lime render. That's kind of the first corner I dug out in part 1 of the time lapse. And here is where I think there might be a doorway. So this bit here lines up directly kind of with the steps there. So the first part of part 3 of the dig, next phase is going to be straight digging through here, trying to find if there's a gap, and if there is, obviously digging through it. I'm not entirely sure yet, but that's my suspicion. And the fireplace is obviously by far the most interesting feature revealed so far. So it's cast iron, I think. I mean, it's very rusty, as you can see, but it's fairly superficial, so it's not rotten. It doesn't crumble away. It's just, you know, surface corrosion. And I will clean this up at some point, give this a proper clean and brush down. I have obviously cleared away the bulk of the spoil, but this whole area needs a finer kind of detailing, and I will revisit this probably in a later video when I've done that. But you can see it's kind of, well, it's split mostly into two parts. So there must have been, I guess, an open fireplace there. So there's this kind of grids that would have kept the burning logs and coals in, and there were charred kind of fire bricks and stones in here and bits and pieces. Obviously they would have had fires there. And then there's the oven section. So the oven is just this kind of cast iron box and inner casing. I think it was actually double shelled, kind of double walled oven, because there's this bit of sheet metal here and other bits of kind of cracked rusty sheet metal, which I think formed a kind of second skin that was a kind of an inch above that inner casing and then extended around all of it and met up with this bit here. And the main thing about this obviously noticeable is the door is missing. I don't know what happened to it. I was half hoping it might have been in this bit here, have been taken off, although I don't know why it would have been. But you can see there are two hinges there. That one's quite bent, so we would have slotted onto those two things there. And then there's a catch on the other side, and the inside, which I scooped out a little bit, but again still needs a good clean. There's a bracket either side where a shelf would have been. So yeah, I did initially think that maybe these bits of kind of these broken up metal sheets could have been a shelf, but I don't think they were. I think, as I said, I think they were a second part of the double wall of the oven. And I suppose it would have been heated by having a fire underneath. I haven't properly again cleaned this bit out, but I don't know if there's a tray that kind of pulls out or it opens out. It doesn't seem to be kind of any obvious hinge on it or anything. I mean, I guess the fire to the side would have generated some heat through the walls because it's cast iron, but presumably the heat source must have been underneath. And I haven't dug out this bit yet either underneath. But I will do. And then the inside of it, yeah, there's kind of pins and things. I don't know what that would be. I don't know if maybe there would have been a kind of a grill over the top of this, you know, from the wall stretching to here. I.e. they would have been kind of above the fire. And in and around the fire, kind of on the floor mostly around here, I found these few bits and pieces, which I think at least two of them definitely relate to the fire. So this is kind of a, it's got these hooks on the back, you can see. It goes up in here in this space, I think. So it fits in that hole. So again, once I've cleaned that out, I might be able to fit it on better. And this is kind of a bit which goes in, I think goes in here. Goes in that gap. So it's just a kind of a more decorative extension to this bit of the kind of the grid again that would have kept in the burning coals and logs. And then there are these two bits that I'm not sure what they are. So this kind of has, you see, has these kind of drilled holes in, which are recessed, and then the top edges has kind of grooves in it, and there's a pin on the back. So if you've any idea what that is, let me know. And then there's this very kind of heavy duty iron kind of tray. There's a handle on the front similar to this handle here. Again, I don't know what that handle but it would have been for. That doesn't move in any direction as far as I can tell, although maybe it's just seized up. Again, once I've cleaned it up properly, that may reveal more. But yeah, I will revisit this. And I would have guessed this was probably mid to late 19th century. And the thing is, when you're digging up a house like this, you'll find bits and pieces and think, well, you know, that would be the edge of the house. But I suppose there's no reason to think that. It could be the case, for example, the walls are maybe 300 years old, but then there are internal fixtures and fittings that are more modern, just like obviously you would find in any house that's currently lived in. Well, certainly lots of old houses that you find lots of old houses where parts of the shell, the walls of the building will be hundreds of years old, but they will obviously have more modern things inside. So, as I say, I don't think this fireplace is that old. It could be 150 years old, but that doesn't necessarily mean the whole house is 150 years old. It just means this was added at a later date. And again, obviously there are bits and pieces of brickwork and so on. So the house, you know, it isn't medieval. You know, it isn't ancient. I think it's more, yeah, maybe 200 years old. So the map again from 1839, I think is 183 years ago. But it certainly may be 250 years old, possibly more again. But there are obviously bits and pieces, I think, which are more modern than that. So here you are. Here's an overview of the objects that I've found so far. Set them all out on a table. Here we have the ceramics and kind of bottle section, rusty old bits of metal and ironwork and so on. And I mean, there's definitely the case that a lot of this does not relate to the occupation of the house in terms of when it was actually lived in. I think quite a bit of it it's just kind of rubbish really that's been dumped here. In fact, in the first part, in the comment section of part 1, someone used the term midden, the word midden, which I'd never heard before or used before, M-I-D-D-E-N, which I think means it's a spot where it's a place where people used to dump rubbish, I suppose. And in fact, they were saying they didn't think it was a midden because there were no signs of kind of rubbish. But I'm not sure that's right. I think parts of it, certainly the outside, where all of these, almost every single part of the bottles and ceramics were found there, I think it was the case that there was a period where bits and pieces were kind of dumped here, bits of rubbish, bits of broken bottles and things. So I certainly don't think a lot of that relates to when the house was lived in. And the same for much of the metal, or parts of the metalwork, certainly. You know, this pipe clip and Jubilee clip, for example, is definitely not from 1839. And this old hinge, I think this hinge is quite rusty, but I think actually I think this might even be something that I have used myself, something I was building and I've left there, and it's got stuck behind in the ground, and it's just rusted away. And certainly other bits and pieces of this metal. There's a bit of barbed wire here, these other bits and pieces. I think possibly some of these are more modern. You know, they just say they've just been dumped there, or they relate to things that I or other people have done there more recently and have just kind of left behind. That seems like a bit of a spring or a coil of some kind. I don't know. I'm not sure what that is. There's this, which I think possibly relates to plumbing of some kind. It says Lodge on it. See there. Possibly part of a tap. I'm not quite sure what that is. But then there are bits of metal which definitely are much older. So this is, I think, possibly is another hinge, but an older hinge, which is much more the rust is much rustier, kind of much more deeper kind of rust, and it's a kind of that kind of style hinge which you see on older gates and woodwork, which I think quite possibly relates to that. And then this is a door catch, a handle and a door catch, which again I think is fairly old. And a few other bits and pieces. I'm not quite sure what that is. It's kind of a hoop. Again, very rusty piece of iron. This I found, first I thought it might have been a pipe. I mean, it's shaped a bit like a pipe, but I actually think this is hollow. You can see it, well, not hollow, it's got a hole through it, as you can see, so that's full of soil. So I'm not quite sure what that is. Maybe it's part of a tool or a mould for something. So if you have an idea, let me know. But you can see it has a kind of, it is shaped a bit like a pipe of some kind. But then there's a hole all the way through, and it's made out of metal, which is very rusty. And this is kind of the nails and bolts section. Again, a few of which, some of, I think possibly, for example, this one, I think maybe relates to bits and pieces I've done. So for example, that bike structure I made, that had nails and screws and things, but definitely some of these older, bigger ones, I don't even think they sell stuff like this anymore, or is certainly commonly used. So this would have been from the timbers of the house. Lots of these old, very rusty old, I assume, iron bolts. That again, if they did take the roof apart and take it away, I guess they would have left lots of these bolts behind as they were taking it apart, but there are a lot of them. It's probably the main thing you find is nails. Not very interesting, unfortunately. That's a huge kind of bolt there. But yeah, a lot of them in the soil. A couple of old shards of bone. That one has been cut, as you can see. Got a smooth surface there. An animal bone of some kind, probably sheep, lamb, maybe. This is a kind of a little metal case of some kind, which is hollow. I haven't been able to pry it open, it's very rusty again. It does have a hole in it, but there doesn't seem to be anything inside. A small hole there, you can see. Yeah, and then the ceramic section. So again, I think most of this is more modern. You've got mostly pieces of broken plate, as you can see. That's I think a handle to a teacup, probably. Bits of old broken bottles. I can't seem to find any kind of dates on the bottles or names of things particularly. The only one with any writing on, I think, is this one, which just says FLAC. I don't know what word that meant to mean. Is meant to form part of. There's this whole bottle here, which again I think is more modern. Just looking at that, it's kind of screw cap at the top, and there's this much bigger bottle top, or bottle hole, which I think is probably from a demijohn, possibly. Kind of big, like gallon style glass. This one here, but again, there's nothing written on these. There's no real easy way to date any of this. And again, I'm certainly not any kind of expert in these ceramics. I don't know anything about these plates. I assume that was part of a plate. And then a few bigger chunks of metal, aside from the few bits by the fireplace I showed you already. This is it actually looks like a stone, but it's a very big, very chunky piece of, again, a rusty metal. It may have formed part of a pot or something, I don't know, of some kind of tool maybe. Another slightly smaller bit there, and then there's this, which is a big kind of rectangular piece of rusted metal, which I think possibly has some kind of nub on the top. It may have formed part of a tool, possibly a hoe, so it would have been a bit there leading to a wooden handle, or potentially it's again, it might be something related to the inside, but I think I found this on the outside of the wall, not the inside of the building. I'm not sure what else it could be. I suppose potentially it could be one of those, like a boot cleaner kind of thing you scrape your boots on, but I don't know I'm not sure. But if you have, again, if you have any ideas of what that might be, put them in the comments. But yeah, most of these ceramics and pottery bits, they're all very broken, as you can see, apart from one or two bottles. And these bolts are all very rusty. So no coins yet, unfortunately. Some of you may have seen a story, if you follow these kind of things. There was a story in the UK, I think only a few weeks ago, where someone found £760,000 worth of gold under their floor. I think they were getting a new floor. They obviously owned an old house. I think it was a couple in the north of England somewhere. And they had the floor dug up and they found this stash of gold coins. And then sold them at auction and made a huge amount of money. But I think realistically, given this type of housing was probably, I think it would have been workers' accommodation, kind of tied accommodation, small workers' cottages, or a cottage. and you know, the people who lived here would not have had any money. I don't think they would have had a stash of gold coins underneath, but I may find, you know, a couple of smaller coins and something a bit more interesting than this. I mean, ultimately I have only dug probably, you know, 10% of what needs to be dug, if that. So there's a long way to go, and I will find more and more of this. But again, the most common thing that's found, certainly on the inside of the building, is these old kind of nails and bolts and things, which again I assume comes from the woodwork, comes from the door frames, the window frames, the roof timbers, and have been left behind. Maybe they fell out when they were taking it all apart. And that is it. That is everything that I have found so far. And that is the walk around. So that's kind of everything I've uncovered so far. If you think I missed things, or you kind of want to look at certain things in more detail, then just let me know in the comments, and I'll either try and answer in the comments if it's a question, or I'll pick it up in a later video, because I will do more walkthroughs, not necessarily after each part, but maybe after parts 3 and 4 I'll do another one, possibly after each part, but they'll be a lot shorter than this. This video is going to be too long. I don't really like doing videos like this, so as you may have gathered, it's not really my forte. If anything, it feels like it's more effort than doing the digging. It doesn't come naturally to me, but I will make some more of them, because I know some people are interested in knowing more about the site and so on. But that's really it. I can't think of any in terms of the other comments or questions that came up in the first 2 parts of the time lapse. There was some criticism from some quarters. The music, of course, in part 1, some people absolutely hated, which I kind of understand a little bit. I didn't think it was so bad, but I appreciate it wasn't to everyone. But anyway, I won't be using that again. And the other main thing that comes up in the comments, a few people, a minority of people, but some people, the more perhaps serious archaeologist crowd, or you know, not archaeologists themselves, but people who I think have seen proper digs and know more about it, obviously a bit critical about my methods. I think a bit cavalier, reckless. I think in fact the words "an archaeologist would cringe" was used of more than once, which I kind of understand. I appreciate it's not this is not a dig to any kind of professional standard. You know, as far as I think the use of the pickaxe in the mattock, or the pick mattock, was given a specific mention, as yeah, obviously potentially damaging things and so on. But I'm mostly using that in the big bulk of the mass, which is kind of a metre above the floor, which is very difficult to make progress in without using it. And I'm not averse to doing more finer work and using a small trowel and brushing things down, which again I will do for the fireplace, definitely, and bits and pieces. But you know, realistically, long story short, am I going to do the rest of the dig with a tiny little trowel and a toothbrush? I'm afraid not. I just think that's not realistic for me in terms of achieving it. And also, I think I've probably hopefully cleared this up a little bit, but although it is obviously in the ruins of an old house, it's not, I suppose, a true archaeological find in the sense that there was a complete total secret, and I'm the first person who ever knew about this house. As I've said, you know, there was kind of local people who knew about it, and and also appears on publicly available maps. At least one map, but I would suspect quite a few historical records of it. It's not like some sites you read about in the news where they find an old house buried under a farmer's field in the middle of nowhere. It hasn't been seen by anybody. No one alive knew it was there. It's been buried for centuries, and so on. Obviously, it's still a historical site, and there are items. There are some objects, historical objects, kind of items of interest, but. Yeah, I mean, some people were suggesting that, you know, a team of university archaeologists could or should be coming to sort of take over the whole dig and so on, and things like that. And I think some of those comments were sort of more just kind of trying to be helpful suggestion that I could get some help doing it, but rather than critical. Though some were, I think, were critical, saying that, you know, it needed to be done by professionals. But I think also this site should be seen in the context of the history of the UK and of Wales and just this region. I mean, there's a Roman amphitheatre 25 miles in that direction. There are medieval castles. There are all kinds of very, very old, interesting buildings and sites and digs. I don't think really that you know, a house that probably stopped being living in 100 years ago and is just the foundations of an old house that is on maps and again people knew is here, is really of interest to professional archaeologists. But yeah. But in terms of the digging methods, I will be continuing in much the same vein, really. You know, I mostly am using a spade and shovel on the big bulk of the spoil in the living room, where the camera's sat on. But I am trying to be a bit more careful around in certain bits and pieces. But yeah, I just thought I'd address that, because again, quite a few people mentioned that it obviously drew in an interested kind of archaeologist crowd, or people who watch those kind of videos on YouTube, some of whom were not very happy with how I was doing the work, which is understandable. People are entitled to their opinions, but I just thought I'd mention that. But that's it for the video. Part 3 of the dig time lapse will be out soon, next couple of weeks I think, hopefully weather dependent, and then yeah, we'll go from there. But thank you for anyone who's watched this and certainly watched parts 1 and 2. Got way more views than I ever expected them. I'd never taken YouTube seriously, never put hardly any videos on here. I just put it on and thought I'm almost have interest to see if anyone would just pick it up purely from kind of the YouTube algorithm. I didn't even really promote it to anybody at all. Didn't send it to anyone I know. And it really took off, so thank you all for watching, and yeah, see you next time.